My family told everyone I was a failure. They said it gently, of course, with smiles and soft voices and careful words, but they said it. I sat quietly at my brother's engagement dinner napkin, folded on my knees, eyes down while they filled the room with laughter at my expense. Then his fiancée leaned across the table, looked at me for the very first time, and whispered, "Wait, you're..." And the room went completely still. Even my mother forgot to breathe. My name is Lauren Hayes, and in my family, names only mattered if they came with titles people could brag about. Realtor, broker, investor, anything that sounded solid, predictable, and profitable, my name didn't qualify. It floated around dinner tables like background noise, acknowledged only when someone needed a contrast. A reminder that not every story ended in success. The engagement dinner for my brother Daniel was held in a private room at one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants. Dark wood walls, soft lighting designed to make everyone look prosperous, white tablecloths, heavy silverware, a server who refilled glasses before anyone thought to ask. My parents loved places like this. They believed the room you sat in said more about you than anything you could explain with words. I was seated 2 chairs away from Daniel, close enough to hear every quiet joke, far enough to be excluded from the center of conversation. He looked relaxed, confident, already rehearsing the role of future patriarch. People leaned toward him when he spoke. They laughed a little too easily. My parents watched him with the exact expression they had worn my entire life when discussing him. Relief mixed with pride. No one asked how I was. Not really. When someone did glance my way, my mother filled the silence before I could draw breath. "Lauren is still figuring things out," she said, gently, the way someone smooths a wrinkle only they can see. My father added something about patience, about how not everyone was built for real pressure. They both smiled as if they were being generous. I focused on the table instead. The flicker of the candle, the faint smell of charred steak and crushed pepper, the low hum of voices bleeding in from the main dining room. These small details had always been my anchor. I had learned a long time ago that if I stayed still enough, people would speak as though I wasn't there at all. My brother's fiancée, Claire, sat directly across from me. She did not dominate the table the way Daniel did. She observed it. When my parents spoke, she listened without interrupting. When Daniel talked about work, she asked questions that made him slow down and think. Her eyes moved carefully across every face, reading tone more than words, noticing what was left unsaid as much as what was spoken aloud. I had seen people like her before, not often. But I recognized the quality, the ability to sit inside a room and understand its architecture without being told. At one point, my father told a joke about the different paths his children had taken. The table laughed politely. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the particular pressure that came from being turned into a story someone else was writing, a character whose role had already been decided. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. Silence had become my reflex over the years, not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining a life that no one at that table had ever truly wanted to understand. What none of them knew was that this dinner was not just another evening of endurance for me. It was a test. A quiet, private test of how long I could sit inside a room built to exclude me and what would happen if someone, for once, actually noticed the cracks. That night was not new. It was simply louder than usual. A few months earlier, I had opened my phone to find photographs from a gathering at my parents' house. A networking evening, drinks on the patio, people in tailored blazers standing near the pool, laughing easily. I hadn't been invited. When I asked my mother about it later, she sounded genuinely surprised that I had noticed. She explained it was a very technical crowd, and she hadn't wanted me to feel out of place, as if being excluded was a form of care, as if my absence had been arranged for my benefit. Then there was the 4th of July barbecue. The heat, the smell of charcoal, paper plates bending under too much food. I had been standing near the back fence, talking to a distant relative, when my father's voice rose above the music. He was talking about Daniel again. The business, the legacy, the future. Then he mentioned me not with pride, not with warmth, but with a kind of fond amusement, the way adults talk about a child who hasn't quite grown up yet. Someone nearby patted my arm gently. Another person changed the subject. Everyone moved on. I stayed where I was and finished my drink. Back at the dinner table, Daniel lifted his glass and made a casual remark about how not everyone chooses the traditional route. He said it lightly, the way someone delivers a line they've rehearsed, his eyes moving briefly to me before returning to the room. A reminder, a line drawn in polished language. I felt the familiar pressure building behind my ribs, the urge to speak, to push back, to say something precise enough to make them stop and reconsider. Instead, I took a slow breath and folded my hands tighter in my lap. I had learned that reacting only gave them more to work with. Silence, at least, still belonged to me. The worst part was never the jokes. The worst part was the offers. A week before the engagement dinner, Daniel had called me. His voice was soft, measured the careful tone people use when they believe they are doing someone a favor. He asked whether I needed help selecting something appropriate to wear. He didn't want me to feel embarrassed, he said. He wanted the evening to go smoothly for everyone. The implication was clear. I was the variable that needed managing. Back at the table, my mother leaned slightly toward Claire and began speaking about my future as though it were an unresolved inconvenience, something still waiting to be sorted. She talked about stability, about the kind of support that might one day give me a firmer footing. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder as she spoke. Light, but deliberate. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I didn't look up right away. I focused instead on the sound of my own heartbeat, steady, unhurried, controlled. I thought about the early mornings, the late calls from overseas contacts in different time zones, the agreements signed quietly, without ceremony, the decisions made alone, without anyone's approval or applause. They had mistaken my restraint for uncertainty. They had read my patience as dependence. Across the table, Claire had stopped following the family's conversation. She was watching me now, not casually, not politely. She was watching the way someone watches when they have started to ask themselves a question they haven't yet said aloud. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself to breathe a little more deeply. Not because I expected rescue, not because I needed anyone at that table to finally see me, but because I understood something they didn't. Control doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits. The dinner continued. My parents kept talking. Daniel kept performing. The wine kept flowing and the laughter kept rising. But beneath the surface of all of it, something had quietly shifted. Like a wire pulled too tight, just before it breaks. I didn't flinch when my mother's hand stayed on my shoulder a second too long. I didn't look at Daniel when he nodded, as though the question of my future had been neatly resolved by other people on my behalf. Outwardly, I remained exactly the same, calm, still, agreeable to all appearances. But something had finally settled into place inside me, quiet and certain, the way deep decisions tend to feel when they've been a long time coming. The truth was simple. My life had never been as uncertain as they believed. It simply didn't look like theirs. While my parents hosted dinner parties and spoke loudly about growth, reputation, and the appearances of success, my days ran on an entirely different clock. Early mornings blurred into late nights. My apartment stayed quiet, except for the low hum of my laptop fan and the occasional buzz of a call arriving from a time zone 12 hours ahead. I had learned to measure progress in small confirmations, signed contracts, cleared payments, brief messages that said only, "We're moving forward." There was no applause, no audience, no moment where someone leaned across a table and told me I had done something remarkable. Just momentum. Quiet, accumulating momentum. I never talked about the work publicly, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I couldn't afford to. The agreements were still fragile. The architecture of what I was building required patience above everything. One unguarded comment, one loose word in the wrong conversation could unravel months of careful preparation. And so, when my family offered help, money, advice, introductions, I smiled politely and declined each time. Letting them underestimate me had been, in a strange way, the most strategic decision I had ever made. It was safer than correcting them, safer than explaining a world they had never asked to understand. That night at the restaurant, watching conversations swirl around me like smoke from the candles, I realized how completely they had confused restraint with failure. They saw my rented apartment and read it as proof that I had given up. They saw my plain clothes and called it surrender. What they could not see, what they had never once tried to see, was the discipline it required to live quietly while building something that simply could not afford distractions. something that needed stillness and patience and years of working in the dark before it would be ready to step into the light. Daniel refilled his own glass and leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the shape of the evening. My father ordered another round without looking at the menu. My mother began talking about the holidays, who would host, who would sit where, what traditions could be absorbed and updated to accommodate a new member of the family. She was already designing the future, arranging it in her mind, the way she arranged furniture, with purpose, with aesthetics, with every element in its proper place. I was there in her vision, I knew, just not at the center of it. Claire, however, was no longer part of their conversation. At some point, I couldn't say exactly when she had stopped tracking the family stories and started tracking me. Her gaze returned to my face again and again across the breadth of the white tablecloth. Not rudely, not with pity, with something far more uncomfortable, genuine attention. She was watching the pauses, the specific moments when I chose not to speak, the way I didn't rush to defend myself when my father made another comment about paths not taken. She was watching the stillness, reading it not as weakness but as something else entirely. I had seen that look before. On business calls. In the moment just before someone said, "I think I've been making the wrong assumptions about this." My father raised his glass suddenly, cutting through the hum of the room. "To family," he said, smiling broadly, "and to new beginnings." The table echoed him. I lifted my glass half a second, after everyone else, just late enough to stay invisible, just present enough not to create an incident. I had practiced that half-beat delay for years. It was the exact distance required to survive evenings like this without surrendering. Daniel launched into a new story, a bigger house, a new investment, a future that seemed to expand every time he described it. My parents filled the spaces between his sentences, interrupting each other to polish his words until they gleamed. Then my father paused, as though remembering a detail he'd almost forgotten. "And Lauren," he said, gesturing loosely in my direction, "well, she's always been independent." The pause before that word was not accidental. My mother added her own contribution. She likes doing things her own way. The way people speak about a stubborn habit they hope will eventually correct itself. We just want her to be secure. The world is hard, and we worry. I kept my eyes on the grain of the wood near my plate. A faint scratch in the surface. Something solid to fix my attention on. Across the table, Claire tilted her head slightly. I noticed her exhale controlled, deliberate, as though something had just clicked. Then she asked, in a voice that carried no performance and no filler, "Lauren, what exactly is it that you do?" The question landed differently from every other question asked at that table all evening. It wasn't polite. It wasn't rhetorical. It was direct in the way that only genuinely curious people manage to be direct without hostility, without theater, simply pointed toward truth. Before I could respond, Daniel chuckled. "It's complicated," he said quickly. "Some tech thing. She's been experimenting." My father nodded with practiced ease. "Lots of people try those spaces. It's a tough environment. Takes a special kind of temperament to make it work." I felt heat rise slowly along the back of my neck. Still, I said nothing. Claire did not look at either of them. "What kind of platform?" she asked, eyes still on me, voice still even. The table went quiet in a way that felt unusual. Not the ordinary quiet of a pause between courses, something different, denser. Like the air just before a storm decides what it wants to become. My parents shifted almost imperceptibly in their chairs. Daniel cleared his throat. "She's modest," my mother said quickly, her hand moving back to my arm. "She's never liked talking about herself. It's just her way." That was when Claire leaned forward slightly, not toward the family, toward me. She lowered her voice just enough to change the texture of the conversation, not enough to be private. "Is it logistics related?" she asked. I looked up for the first time in several minutes. "Yes," I said, one word, calm, steady. Her eyebrows lifted not dramatically, just a fraction, the particular lift of someone whose internal calculation has just been revised upward. "Global reach?" she continued. I nodded once. Daniel laughed too quickly, too loudly. "See, this is what I mean. Very vague. She's always been like this. Impossible to pin down." Claire ignored him completely. Her attention had sharpened into something entirely professional now. The pleasant dinner party version of her had quietly stepped aside. "Supply chain optimization?" she said, not quite a question, more like a key being placed carefully in a lock. I felt my pulse slow. Yes, I said again. The silence that followed was different from any silence the evening had produced so far. Claire exhaled slowly. Her eyes stayed on mine for a long moment. Then she murmured just loud enough for the whole table to hear, though clearly meant only for me. Wait, you're… She stopped herself. Mid-sentence. Deliberate, controlled. The effect was immediate and absolute. Conversation died. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the server 3 tables away seemed to hesitate, as though the sound of the room had briefly changed frequency. It felt as though the entire restaurant had drawn one long breath and forgotten entirely how to release it. My father was the first to speak. "What is it?" he asked. The irritation in his voice was thin and carefully managed, but it was there, pressing against the surface of his composure like something that had been held back a moment too long. Claire straightened in her chair. She didn't look at him right away. She looked at me one last, measured glance, as though confirming something she had already decided. Then she said, clearly, Lauren Hayes. A pause. "You're the founder, aren't you?" No one at the table moved. The candles kept burning. The ambient noise of the restaurant pressed softly against the walls of the private room, but our table had become sealed from it, a glass box, suspended. I held Claire's gaze. Then I gave a small, single nod. The sound my brother made was difficult to describe. It wasn't quite a laugh. It wasn't quite a gasp. It was something caught between the two, the noise of a person whose working assumptions have just collapsed without warning. "Founder of what?" he demanded. His voice was louder than he had intended. A few faces at nearby tables turned briefly in our direction. Claire didn't answer him. She reached instead into the small evening bag resting beside her plate. She moved without hurry, with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to making decisions in rooms where the stakes were real. She placed her phone on the tablecloth and tapped the screen twice. Then she turned it around and slid it toward the center of the table. The screen displayed an article, industry-focused. No photographs of me. I had always made certain of that. Just clean analysis, precise numbers, and a series of quotes from investors describing a founder who had chosen, deliberately and strategically, to remain out of the public eye. The company was referred to by its sector name and its metrics. The language was careful and exact. "This," Claire said, her voice level as still water, "is one of the most closely watched logistics platforms in the sector right now." She paused. "Let it settle. Quiet launch, unusually strong early traction, international reach across 4 continents, and a founder who has so far declined every interview and every press opportunity offered to her." My father leaned forward slowly, squinting at the screen. His brow furrowed in the particular way it did when he encountered information that conflicted with a belief he had held for a long time. My mother's smile, the warm, social, carefully maintained expression she had worn all evening, had vanished completely. She sat with her lips slightly parted, looking at the phone as though the words on the screen were in a language she hadn't known she would need to read tonight. "We've been trying to get a meeting for months," Claire continued, eyes moving around the table now, addressing the whole family with the careful patience of someone explaining something to people who are only just beginning to understand. "The usual channels haven't worked. No press, no public appearances, no social media presence, just results." Daniel shook his head. "That's not," he started. He stopped, realized abruptly that no one was listening to him. It was a new sensation for him. I could see it register across his face, the surprise of it, and beneath the surprise, the faint, dawning discomfort of a man whose authority in a room has just quietly transferred elsewhere. Claire looked at him then. Her expression wasn't sharp. It wasn't triumphant. It was something more precise than both of those things. "You told me," she said, "that you wanted me to meet the family, that you wanted me to understand where you came from." She let the sentence breathe for a moment. "You said you wanted me to meet visionaries." Another pause, smaller, more deliberate. I didn't expect to find one sitting directly across from me. The room did not erupt. There was no dramatic outburst, no raised voice, no moment of theatrical confrontation. What happened was quieter and, for that reason, far more powerful. The table simply froze. My mother's hand slid from my shoulder slowly, as though she had only just realized it was there and was no longer certain it belonged. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. Nothing came out. My father straightened in his chair. The confident color that usually lived in his face had retreated. He looked older, suddenly, more uncertain. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. His voice had lost its edge not from gentleness, but from confusion. He sounded, for the first time in my memory, genuinely unsure of himself. I didn't answer right away. I picked up my water glass, took a single, unhurried sip, set it back down on the linen with a soft, precise sound. "You never asked," I said. 3 words, quiet, without accusation or performance, simply true. Daniel pushed back from the table abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, a sharp sound that pulled 2 or 3 glances from neighboring tables. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "If any of this were real, we would have known. Someone would have said something. You would have said something." Claire's eyes moved to her phone screen briefly, then back. "The whole point," she said, "was that you didn't." Something in Daniel's expression cracked open, not anger. Not the practiced, defensive anger I had seen him use 100 times before, the kind deployed to reclaim control of a conversation. This was different. This was fear, the kind that comes not from a threat, but from a mirror. From suddenly seeing the shape of something you've believed about someone else and realizing it describes only yourself. The restaurant moved around us, a gentle, indifferent hum of other conversations, other evenings, other people with their own private architectures of silence and assumption. But our table remained sealed inside its own quiet, as though encased in something invisible and impermeable. People at nearby tables were watching now, discreetly, but watching. Whispers moved like small currents beneath the ambient sound. I felt, oddly, very calm. Not the suppressed calm of someone swallowing something difficult. A different kind. The calm that comes when you have been waiting a long time for a thing to resolve itself, and it finally does. "I didn't build it in secret to prove anything," I said. My voice was steady, unhurried. I wasn't performing composure, I simply had it. I kept it private because the work required it, because the agreements were fragile and the timing was critical, and there was simply no version of this table. I glanced briefly at my parents, at Daniel, at the white linen and the heavy silverware and the careful, curated presentation of a quiet, successful family that would have understood it, or helped it, or left it alone long enough to become what it needed to become. A long silence. My father swallowed. My mother's fingers, resting on the tablecloth, curled inward against her palm. "Lauren," she said. My name, for once, without a qualifier attached to it. Without a softening clause or a gentle amendment, just the name. I looked at her, briefly, without warmth and without coldness, simply directly. Then I set my napkin beside my plate, smoothed it once with the flat of my hand, and stood. The movement felt final in the way that certain gestures do, the kind that mark the end of something, not with drama, but with a simple, irreversible clarity. I turned to Claire. "It was genuinely good to meet you," I said. She held my gaze. Something passed across her expression, respect, unmistakable and uncomplicated, and she gave a single, quiet nod. I didn't look at my father again. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. I picked up my bag from the back of my chair, walked the length of the private room, and pushed open the door. Behind me, the silence I left was unlike any I had experienced in that family before. Not the familiar silence of dismissal. Not the comfortable silence of people who have agreed, without words, to look past something inconvenient. This silence was different. It was heavy. It was uncomfortable. And unlike every silence that had come before it, this one had been earned. Not by them. By me. I didn't rush when I stepped outside. The night air was cooler than I expected. It moved against my skin like something released, a breath held too long, finally let go. I walked a full block before stopping, letting the noise of the street settle around me, letting the warmth of the restaurant fade from my shoulders. My phone buzzed once in my hand. I didn't look at it. For years, I had imagined a moment like this ending with raised voices, or tearful apologies, or some kind of dramatic confrontation that would finally force everything into the open. Instead, it ended with a chair scraping against a floor and a door swinging quietly shut behind me. Nothing. And somehow, that nothing was heavier than anything I could have planned. In the days that followed, the silence held. No family group messages. No carefully worded texts pretending the evening hadn't happened. When my mother finally called 4 days later, her voice was unsteady in a way I had never heard before. She asked questions that sounded less like curiosity and more like attempts to find solid ground, to locate herself in a story that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. I answered her, politely, briefly. I didn't fill the gaps for her the way I had spent years doing. I didn't smooth the edges of the conversation or make it easier to be inside of. That was new. Daniel never reached out. I heard, through someone unconnected to the family, that the engagement dinner had become difficult to retell, that the story had been quietly edited in its retellings, reshaped to protect certain versions of pride. Details adjusted, the sequence rearranged. I let it be rewritten. I had never needed credit. I had never needed the record to reflect what had actually happened. What I needed was something simpler, and something that had now, at last, arrived: distance. What surprised me most, what I hadn't expected, even after everything, was how light the days felt once I stopped carrying their expectations alongside my own. The work continued. Calls, decisions, slow, deliberate progress. The platform moved forward in the way it always had, without announcement, without fanfare, without the permission of anyone who had once decided I wasn't capable of building it. What changed was interior, the constant bracing. The low, chronic tension of sitting inside rooms where the story of who you were had been decided before you arrived. The reflex to shrink, to wait, to fold yourself into a shape small enough not to disturb anything. That weight had not been removed by a single dinner. It had been dissolved, quietly, over years of choosing differently. The dinner had simply been the evening when I finally let myself see that it was already gone. I thought about Claire, about the particular quality of her attention, the way she had looked across a table full of noise and performance, and found the one person everyone else had agreed to look past. I didn't know what would happen next, professionally. I didn't know if our paths would cross again. But I knew what her recognition had done, and, more importantly, what it hadn't done. It hadn't made me feel legitimate. I had been legitimate long before that room, and long before her. What it had done was reflect something I already knew about myself clearly, and in front of the people who had spent the longest denying it. And there was a difference I had discovered between needing validation and simply witnessing the moment when truth finally makes itself undeniable to those who have been resisting it. I hadn't lost my family that evening. I had lost something else entirely, the version of myself that had kept bending and shrinking and rearranging in order to fit inside their frame. The one who had believed, for a very long time, that their approval was the final measure of whether her life had been real. I did not miss her. Not at all. I used to believe that being truly seen by my family would be the thing that finally made me feel whole. I understand now that it was never their seeing that was required. It was my own. That night didn't change who I was. It simply revealed, without ambiguity, what had always been true. And if you have ever been standing in a room full of people who were supposed to know you best and found yourself invisible, diminished, edited into a smaller version of yourself, then you already understand what I mean. You do not need the room's permission to be real. You never did.